Hey, welcome back. So today I want to discuss who I believe is the greatest contemporary African writer out there. Personal opinion, of course, at least that I have read. To use a more subjective term, I'll say she is definitely my favorite contemporary writer about African topics. So, In the Company of Men was the book that I read for Read Around the World for Ivory Coast pretty early on. And her name is Veronique Tadjo, the author. She was born in Ivory Coast, but has also lived in several African countries, as well as France. And she writes, about topics across the continent, and has this extraordinary blend to me of nonfiction, poetry. You never know if she's going to take more of a scientific approach sometimes, or shift a perspective into a character. Her chapters are almost vignettes, but they work together in a way that is so fruitful and interactive to whatever theme she is discussing. Eternal philosophical themes of death and decay and cruelty stalk the pages of her work, while always trying to find the meaning of things and never falling into nihilism. I have so many good things, and all while doing it economically. Her longest book that I've read, 140 pages, 141 pages, is in the Company of Men. Shadow of Imana is 115 or so, and The Blind Kingdom over here is just under 100. These are the two books I'll be discussing today, and mostly The Shadow of Imana. Since I'll link the video to where I discuss In the Company of Men in the description, in case you're interested. I talk with a lot of enthusiasm about that book, but I don't know how much clarity, but I did it pretty early on, so it is what it is. You can check it out if you want, but I definitely recommend the book. So anyway, I want to give a short sort of recap of how I got to Shadow of Imana, which I think is also a masterpiece that I have a really hard time deciding if I think this one is more powerful than In the Company of Men. I have to right now say they're equals. The Blind Kingdom didn't quite have the same impact, but it was written in 1990, when I think she was still finding her style and her footing as an author, and that's great. So I love kind of seeing how, even at this early stage, you can see that she is really striving to be as holistic and crystallize all of these sort of perspectives into one book told in as few and powerful words as possible, but also directly. She's not. I never feel a sense that it's hard to read her books, yet I am so impacted by them. Even The Blind Kingdom had a very powerful ending that was unexpected to me, where a lot of things are kind of happening at once. Almost multiple realities emerge from this book at the same time in 80 pages, 90 pages. So, and The Blind Kingdom is more of a political allegory, which deals with a political situation in Ivory Coast, I believe, where the king, Otto IV, is kind of a very despotic and eccentric ruler and his closest servants are called the blind people, or the elites, while the other people live kind of on the fringes and see this sort of dystopian city that they all live in more for what it is. And I suppose if you had to choose two main characters, you have the king's daughter, the princess, who runs away with the steward. The steward is kind of starting a revolution, and the princess goes to the north and learns from a village elder about the ancient traditions, and this village elder woman kind of shows her this tradition of the mask, which is highly symbolic, and then things culminate in this, as I said, kind of multiple realities emerge at the end of the book, which is fascinating. So very good, and still, just because of its short length, one that I would easily read again. I could easily read any of these three books again. I think they're all fantastic, but really, The Shadow of Imana just knocked me out today, really knocked me out. And it starts autobiographical. It starts out as about the author's travel to Rwanda, and her flight and some people she's talking to on the flight, and she's going to write about the genocide and the aftermath and the stories of the victims that are very difficult for the people who were too close to it to tell. And in this way, The Shadow of Imana is an excellent complement to Cockroaches by Scholastique Mukasonga. And it's interesting that Cockroaches, and this author is actually Rwandan and lost many of her family members in the genocide. But you can see the struggle in this book that she has at directly confronting and telling the stories. Things are told indirectly, and that's one of the most haunting things about this book, Cockroaches, that came out shortly before, actually, The Shadow of Imana. So I almost wonder if, in a way, Veronique Tadjo was seeking to be the one that could tell the world more directly the cruelty and the incomprehensible human suffering that occurred during this. And where do I start? I need to pause the video and get my bearings here. So the book begins, "It had long been my dream to go to Rwanda. No, dream is not the right word. I had long felt a need to exercise Rwanda, to go to that place where those images we had seen on television had been filmed, images that had flashed across the world and had left an indelible horror in every heart. I did not want Rwanda to remain forever a nightmare, a primal fear." I was starting from a particular premise. What had happened there concerned us all. It was not just one nation lost in the dark heart of Africa that was affected. To forget Rwanda after the sound and the fury was like being blind in one eye, voiceless, handicapped. It was to walk in darkness, feeling your way with outstretched arms to avoid colliding with the future. This, right away, what I was thinking of as this began is that a lot of themes that connect to what I was talking about, why I like Veronique Tadjo's work, is that we live in an era we are bombarded with things that we can do and watch and consume. We are bombarded with images, and this actually has the effect of making us forget the important things, of thinking that things are value equivalent. What happened in Rwanda, the Rwandan genocide, is actually one of the most important historic events of our time. I think that very few things can even compare. Because, we can go back to like other genocides. I mean, I think it's arguable that genocides are one of the most incomprehensible. You can't understand a genocide, you can only feel it. That is a sentiment expressed in this book. And memory and feeling and poetry melded with the facts and presenting these stories in a way that is both direct and showing us all the horrible details, but letting poetry be our spirit of resilience. That is what Veronique Tadjo is doing here. The book seems like it starts realist. She, writes about, for example, on page 5 here, Durban, South Africa, and this is the only time we'll be in South Africa in the entire book, this one page. A beachside parking lot. Life is filled with random events that cannot be explained. The man was guarding the cars in the parking lot where we had left our vehicle. He arrived 8 months by way of Zaire. He made the journey on foot from Rwanda. He lives in a township, in a small room he shares with others, who, like him, have ended up here. He fled to the very edge of the sea. And there's one more beautiful paragraph about this man. There are authors that will take this one page and make it an entire book. I've read them. I've tried to read them. Veronique Tadjo does it in one page. It's what we need. This is the stuff we need, okay? to give you an idea of the density that is in this book, I feel like I can turn in her works, I can turn to any chapter, and there is a level of feeling and fusion of different forces, a holistic outlook, going through one perspective at a time, or sometimes multiple perspectives, that leaves me with something to think about for an entire day. In a way, there's something closer to her work about reading a book of poetry, and is interactive in a sense that you can go into different chapters and inhabit different worlds with your own thoughts and with your own research. You know, in a way, it's like, and this is the kind of writing we need. And I think it's something that, you know, one could be inspired by Veronique Tadjo and try to achieve this sort of crystallizing density of meaning and form, and really, you know, in this world where we're bombarded by images and have so many things we could possibly be doing, something to inspire and to guide you, and then you write something of your own using these same principles of understanding that not only is it the reader's time we're concerned about, it's the time that the world has. We don't want to repeat another Rwanda, which we are inevitably going to if we do not learn from it. This is what human history is showing over and over. And if I had to say, like, the one book of the Western canon that I think is the most impactful and important that I've read, that I would say this is the one book of the Western canon I think everybody should read, is Candide by Voltaire. Why? Because for me, it is the book that left it. Not only did it have economy and all the things I love about Veronique Tadjo's work and other authors' work that I love, is this economy and this, I gotta find a better word than economy, but this sort of, it left no doubts in my mind reading it that taking this Age of Enlightenment value and understanding what happened in the Age of Enlightenment, we can see so clearly that this world will not become a better place if we do not make it a better place. That is the essence of scientific thinking. First, we need to understand the world, but then we also need poets to help us feel what it is to be human and what we do understand, and to orient our not souls, but simply our minds or our constructed selves or whatever you want to say, to make things better for other selves and people, and not just people, you know, the planet, other life forms as well. And I'm not like, there was one part in this book about Dian Fossey, for example. If you don't know who Dian Fossey is, just, yeah, look her up. She was a true environmentalist, a true ecologist, a true scientist, but had the depth of feeling of a poet to me. What she did with the gorillas in Rwanda and Congo, I think she was in the mountain range there, and actually it was my wife who introduced me to her, and so maybe I might be getting some of these details wrong because we watched a film about her a while back. But I was very moved by her, I guess the feeling I got from the story, and the fact that it was mentioned in this book, really, that was probably the moment of the book that almost overwhelmed me with emotion, because you had a woman here who was trying to, you know, create an understanding between the gorillas and humans, because you had poachers like killing them, and she's trying to get them protected. For real, because the government wasn't doing anything to stop the poachers due to corruption. So you have this whole complex situation of Dian Fossey juxtaposed with the Rwandan genocide, was a moment where I was just overwhelmed with emotion. How, you know what? I'm gonna find that section so I can read part of it. It's actually later in the book. And it's on, Veronique Tadjo talks about two of her journeys to Rwanda in this book, and they are separated by this sort of surreal part of the book that it really enters the realm of like poetry and surrealism, but it's the dead rise and are kind of walking around like ghosts or zombies or something in between, and there are people reacting to seeing this country filled with these walking dead, and then it goes back to kind of being more realistic. But that central part of the book I found very effective, not forced, a little bit like whoa, I didn't expect that direction, but also I was pleased by it. I felt it was appropriate and not just forcing this kind of, and believe me, this is the first time I even thought of this phrase while talking or thinking about this book, magical realism. It's not any kind of this forced magical realism. Anyway, the Dian Fossey part. I'm sitting next to a woman who is part of the Dian Fossey Foundation. We were talking about the gorillas. They are Rwanda's principal tourist attraction. In the far north of this tiny country, the last silverbacks are living on the heights of the chain of volcanoes. The mountains stretch across Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Uganda. On the Rwandan side, the Volcano National Park has been given over to their use. Dian Fossey has made of it a kingdom. And I'll skip a few paragraphs here. Yet for a long time, their immense size was a reason for men to hunt them. Coming from Europe with their sophisticated weapons or simply from surrounding villages, the hunters wanted to get themselves a trophy and in that way to conquer the fear that they felt of these creatures from another world. Men sought to proclaim themselves once again the uncontested lords of creation. Dian Fossey is dead, probably murdered by poachers. In the end, she had loved animals more than the human race. Yes, it is true that once upon a time the villagers used to hunt the gorillas, but what did they know then of the terrifying creatures with their frighteningly human appearance? It took the establishment of the research station for them to understand that these creatures were Rwanda's most precious possession. More precious than themselves? The competition was on. Who killed the tourists traveling on the Ugandan side of the chain of volcanoes, is the question here. They were people looking for the mountain gorillas, wanted to get close to them, watch them in all the splendor of their freedom. According to the most common version of events, they were the victims of the Interamwe who, still unable to accept defeat, are infiltrating the country and launching attacks along the borders across the chain of volcanoes. And this chapter ends with, do the great apes know what happened at the foot of the mountains? Were they aware of the carnage? Did they sense death as it spread across the territory of humans? And this juxtaposition again, it's like, who was it that killed and mutilated Dian Fossey, the poachers? Who is it that senselessly, for economic reasons, driven by an economic system, is murdering gorillas? That are very intelligent creatures, comparatively speaking. We as humans, we murder each other. We murder other intelligent beings. Of course, there's some animals that would like to eat us as well. So I'm not saying nature is like this defenseless thing and that it's easy to live in nature, because it's not. But these nuances are all in the book, but it does make you pause and say, well, genocide. Humans are really... I don't know if are we the only creature capable of genocide. I'm not going to say that without doing scientific research, but it seems to me we are certainly one of the few. And it makes you wonder too about things like religion and God's creation. And I personally, I don't know where you stand on this watching this video, but this also got to me. The way that the Science Research Station is what made them understand that gorillas are their most precious resource in this park is science has done more good in the world than any religion has. And I will stand by that statement. I'm not saying we need to do away with religion, and I'm not saying that science isn't capable of destroying the world, because it absolutely is. But when you look at the quality of our life, making us understand the world and each other, did it start in a colonialist, racist environment of Europe, at least the scientific models that we tend to use today? Science isn't specific to Europe, by the way. It's also from China, and it's also from other places. And it was also messed up in other places, and nationalist and, ethno-nationalist. But it's clearly something that has improved all of our lives. So it's not the only thing, but it's one of the best things. that we have. And it becomes more and more difficult as you examine a situation like this genocide and the stories of the harrowing stories in this book, that I believe are based on real stories. I could be wrong, but I'm fairly certain they are. From what I also read, this book was a great compliment to the Cockroaches by Scholastique Mukasanga, because, that book was was written by a woman whose family lost a lot of her family in the Rwandan genocide, but was in Europe at the time and experienced a lot of the cruelty that led up to the genocide that should have warned everybody that it was going to happen, decades before it actually happened. But she was actually in Europe when it went on, and then went back, trying to find who was left of her family and things like that. So I'll post the link to that video as well, because I feel like what Veronique Tadjo does in this book, intentionally or not, is fill that gap for those that it is simply too difficult to discuss the raw details of what happened. Those who have lost family, those who actually experienced it, and give a specific and poetic voice to what happened. All raw details included. You have a woman who was raped, and her rapist, after the genocide, sent her a letter asking for forgiveness and love, and this causes her to go into a traumatic remembrance of what happened to her. You have a priest who at gunpoint was forced to murder 3 people with a machete and is on trial and decides to confess and plead guilty because he wants to set an example for other Christians. And even he himself says he deserves death. And it makes you ask, even during these tribunals, what is justice when you have other people who lie or don't tell the truth or tell a half-truth and are not punished? But those who confess guilty are then equally or worse punished, and actually feel shame or were forced to do what they did at gunpoint. And it makes you wonder, what would you do in that situation? It makes you wonder, would your faith be enough to carry you through that if you are someone who believes? I entertain the notion, at least, and I just think that if there is any divine force, it's something that isn't exactly a human mind, and it's something we can't comprehend. And so it's like Fernando Pessoa says, if God wanted us to know him as God, he would have appeared as God and not the mountains. If he wants us to know him as the mountains, the rivers, the sky, then we should just call them mountains, river, and sky. So that's my perspective on it. I'm not judging you or saying you're wrong for believing in what you believe, but that is my perspective right now. And you reflect on this cruelty, the cruelty that humans do to each other, and you have to ask, if this, how can, all the same religious arguments, but how can an all-powerful God allow evil to run rampant in a world like this if he is really all-powerful and all-knowing? And it's, you got to put yourself, you have to imagine over and over and read these stories, these perspectives here, to really get a sense of imagine that is your entire world, that is your entire consciousness. It was the same thing I thought about in the book Veronique Tadjo wrote about the Ebola crisis in in the Company of Men. There were very similar themes that came up, and I was left just feeling this. But again, the poetry of Veronique Tadjo seeks meaning in this, and the meaning that she seeks is memory, is preserving this memory so that we can stop repeating our mistakes. Like Voltaire shows us, it won't be better if we don't make it better. And so memory and poetry and the feelings of, I don't even know if it's empathy. I don't know if empathy is the thing that you're reading this book here, but memory, because empathy is contained also, I think, within memory. And memory is the only, really not the only, but it's the thing that encompasses all of what we can learn and pass on to others. And so perhaps it is memory that is the thing we seek to preserve in fiction. I don't know. That's a good question. Anyway, I've really rambled on this book, but it's left me with so many questions, and I really do hope that someday I can express things about Veronique Tadjo's work better. I don't know, maybe in a more edited video kind of thing, if I ever have the inclination to do that. I just really don't. I like just sitting in front of the camera and expressing my thoughts to everyone who wants to hear them. So I like this model for now, and am sticking with it, at least for the time being. So that's The Shadow of Imana by Veronique Tadjo. Please check her out.